Douglass. So it's quite a wide-ranging question. So I think we can, as long as we stick to talking about the America's Cup, we can pretty much talk about anything we want. And so we've got quite a diverse set of panelists here as well.
Do you want us to move everyone?
No, that's good. I'm fine.
Come and sit with us, baby. It's late in the day.
I might a bit. Clare Harrington, tell us about your involvement and enthusiasm for the America's Cup.
Well, as you know, the New York Yacht Club and our team, American Magic, are in the we're in the last cup, obviously, with not the result we had hoped for, but we all recognize that the America's Cup is not one that you necessarily can win in one iteration. So we are back, and we will be in AC37, and we're very excited about that. The America's Cup, as you all well know, is inextricably linked to the New York Yacht Club, and we've been in it since the inception of the Cup, and it's really in our DNA. So to be back in the event is very exciting for us, and it's just one part of what the New York Yacht Club does, but it's a focus that we've had for a long time, and hoping to be back in it. And if we win it, maybe when we win it, it would be nice to affect some change not in the format so much, but in the cost. Clearly, the cost of the America's Cup is, as you know, quite extreme. I was struck by listening to the presentation about SailGP and how it's a 25 million commitment just out of the gate. Well, the America's Cup, the syndicates to be involved in that, it's 5 and 6 times that cost. So it's an extraordinary amount of money, and it limits the amount of participation that syndicates and countries can afford, yacht clubs can afford. I mean, it's really over the top for most organizations. So we'd love to see, a more Valencia type format where we have multiple countries, multiple syndicates, and generate a lot more excitement amongst in a broader range of participants.
So that would be, so you're putting more value on a higher number of participants, like we saw in Valencia 2007, than the extreme technology that we're seeing, which obviously limits the number of participants.
Obviously the America's Cup has always been about innovation and engineering and technology and pushing the envelope. And these gentlemen know far more about that than I, but we all understand that that's what the America's Cup is about. And certainly that's a very compelling piece of the pie, and under no circumstances would we want to dial that back. And so, and in terms of mainstream sailing, so many of the innovations that are now, my boat, for example, it's what you would consider a classic cruiser racer. It's nothing high tech at all, and yet I have a wing keel. Now that's a direct result of an innovation that came from the America's Cup. I'm certainly not going to put foils on my boat, but these the technology advances in electronics and aerodynamics and those kinds of things definitely filter back to the mainstream sailors and trickle into the design and engineering and sail making of the boats that we all sail in our normal lives.
Quentin, Claire just said she's certainly not going to put foils on her boat, but we've seen boats like Flying Nika, the 60-footer that's been designed by Mark Mills and built to try and win races on line honours, like the Rolex Middle Sea race right here in Malta. So is this a potential trickle down that the kind of foiling that we're seeing at America's Cup level could filter out to the mainstream, or is that just pie in the sky?
The thing is, like, if you take a little bit a step backwards, let's say back in 1983 probably, the first design that was done at VPLP had some foils already, and we've been growing with this developing like the armas, all those foils things, and suddenly you have the cup like getting into this kind of like development and techniques, and in parallel to the one tools we were developing, you have like an amazing force which develop and push really hard, which allows us to reinforce and be much more robust on our toolbox due to this all like, let's say, the design teams like what 100 people sometimes. It's amazing in such a short time frame how you can like improve, and definitely this is like something which help to move on and to envisage to have this on the mainstream sailing. But there are several questions here. What, why, and when? Because definitely it's a matter of time. We can see like today with the wing foil thing, it seems like pretty obvious. This came into the car, and then we got the wing foil. It's amazing. So now we have this in mind. Flying Nika is an amazing boat, but main question is, are we ready for the mainstream sailing to wear an helmet? That's something I don't know. You should answer for this. And so from this, we had a bit of thought, on the VPLP, and we believe like maybe there is one option which would be like some kind of not a compromise, but already a step. And I don't know if it's possible to move on the next slide, where we would benefit from, let's say, all the techniques, technology, and tooling robustness to try to integrate those technology into something accessible. And on the one boat, like you can see now on the screen, we ask ourselves, what can we do, with this? This is an 85-footer, and we thought, all right, what do we do? Can we race with such a boat? How is it going to work in the harbor? What kind of speed we want to achieve, and we ended up with like such a project where when you have like 15 knots of wind blowing, normally like you'll be sailing around like 16, 17 knots of boat speed, something like this. And if you stay reasonable, let's say, you can have a little bit of a boost, and you have like a gain speed of like probably 5 knots or something like this, so which remain to be accessible, feasible for any kind of owner-driven boat, and it's just like you take the benefits and the fun without going too crazy, so it was a little bit a thought like to keep like in a compromise mode, to take the good out of the America's Cup knowledge and how we can like move on to the next generation, and to make like an opportunity to access, the future of sailing, maybe,
Julien Pilate from North Sales, what kind of trickle down do you think we can expect from the next America's Cup?
I see one that might come later, but we are talking about about the data. So we are generating data from the rig load, from all the sensors we have on the boat. But for the last couple of years, we have seen like pretty good tool that analyze the data. So it's on a wider term, it's called data science. And Facebook, Google, they have developed, for instance, some really good models that are based on artificial intelligence, and they are free, available. And all this technology we are just scratching the surface for the data analysis. And I think clearly at the Cup we are spending a lot of time to analyze the data, because we are generating a terabyte of data on a daily basis, and creating models that can help us to understand the boat. It's a big part of what we do, and I think all the learning that we are going to have there, all the tools that will be developed, can then be used in mainstream sailing, probably more for the daily racer, for instance. But I think it would be easier for them to understand, to analyze all the data being generated by the boat, and I think that would be quite powerful. And again, we are just scratching the surface. When you look at all the data, we have all have seen the video with all the sensor. You quite often wonder, well, what are the trends? What can I do for improving this? How my boat is working? And yeah, in short, we can generate models that help the sailor to get better. And yeah, in my opinion, this is quite an important topic, and maybe in the coming years it will become even popular in the mainstream sailing.
Being as I am from the media, and the same with Nic, I was really interested in the data that we saw coming out of the last America's Cup in 2021, not least that Jimmy Spithill's heart rate never seems to go over 60.
Yeah.
So what's your take on that, and also the sort of the wider media appeal of this start of America's Cup?
I think it's been, well, the biggest change has been the reconnaissance versus the spying, I think. So we're seeing a lot of content coming out of the boats already this early in the time period. So that's been interesting for us all to see, and I think we've probably all seen that AC40 have a little crash the other day. So everyone's already being a lot more open, which we spoke about earlier in the day. The data absolutely is going to be interesting, because I think that draws in a lot of the people who are outside the sport. It gives them more understanding, and it gives us more to talk about in terms of aligning it with other sports. There's so much data that comes out of tennis or Olympic sports, and the heart rate especially. It was amazing watching Pete Burling's heart rate versus Jimmy Spithill's heart rate was definitely an interesting one. But I think something that I learned from the last Cup, because we all had to make it work, was that we can also do coverage from a distance, because the amount of media that's coming out and is being made available and accessible to people like Matt Sheehan with his Planet Sail, to myself who covered the Cup quite in depth but was across the ditch and couldn't get into New Zealand. There's a lot more content available, which is helping us all to do our job and to try and get more eyes on the sport as well, because the America's Cup is just next level. I think had something like I think 50,000 hours viewed of content that I put out during the America's Cup, and that was all remote coverage, talking to people and getting their observations. John Bertrand, Tom Slingsby, who also couldn't be there, Pete Jarry, when unfortunately American Magic had their crash, we were able to have a lot of people talking about what was happening and breaking it down. So in terms of technology for me as well, maybe we don't all have to be there, but we can all be helping everybody understand it and get involved.
And in terms of the kind of feedback that you get from your audience, how do you think that this extreme format of really fast boiling is working both within the sailing world and the non-sailors?
I think there's a lot of people who comment, and it's really hard to know whether it's the majority of the view, because you get a lot more negative comments than you ever get positive comments. That's just the way that it is, and I'm sure we've all experienced that. So there's a lot of people who want it to go back to non-foiling, and I have to say that, I came out of Australia, so, growing up with hearing about, Newport and how massive that was, and then Fremantle, and it going back with 30 plus teams and nation and all of the power behind the countries. And so I think that perhaps is missing a little bit because of how expensive it has gotten, but at the same time it is generating interest and it is pulling people towards our sport as well. So it's a really hard line to walk, but everybody is watching the America's Cup. Everybody wants to know what's happening, but if there was some way that we could make it more affordable and have more teams again, then of course I would be on board with that. But that's like the Midas. It's like Atlantis, So yeah, it's a tough question.
Claire, why does it matter if it's more affordable. As long as you've got two people turning up for a match race, you've got an America's Cup.
It's true. That's very true. But I think so much of it is about the Challenger Series as well, and the whole build up to the America's Cup. It's the whole process, and you know, I don't know what the exact format will be just yet, but if there's a series of challenger matches, that's where the excitement is generated. One of the things that is fascinating to me, I mean, the whole concept of foiling has come so far, and I think that technology will continue, and the foiling will improve to the point where I think boats will be able to stay up on foils at lower wind speeds, and the whole technique of foiling will improve. And part of the America's Cup, the competition itself is about the engineering teams and the designers and the technology that happens even during the competition. So it's the teams that are and the engineers and the designers who are nimble and can make the changes on the fly as the competition is happening. Those are the teams that will win, and it's as much a design competition as it is a sailboat race. The other pillar of the America's Cup that I particularly find fascinating has to do with race management. And race management was my background in the last 20 years or so. And the format, the actual format, the race course itself is designed to keep the boats close, and that can actually affect the racing rules. And those rules will again trickle down to the normal racing in the racing that we do at our local clubs and venues. So all those things are what pull viewers and participants into being engaged with the America's Cup. I mean, people who know nothing about sailing know the America's Cup, right? So we should capitalize on that, and that's marketing.
100%. I think you're spot on there. I mean, time is incredibly hard, and sailing is. And I think what we know at this conference is we're not only battling, class versus class, all those classes that we saw at the start, but we're battling for people's time, because, to rig a boat, to design something, and in the trickle down. So, when we're thinking about how do we get people interested and how do we move forward, that's the really hard thing, capturing their attention. But in terms of club racing even, or my nationals in the VX1, which I'm sailing now, we don't have races over 20 minutes long now. We go out, I had a regatta in June, I went out at 9 a.m. in the morning, got 5 races done, came in and went out and did the media for the Etchells in the afternoon, and they had 3 races that were an hour and 20 minutes long. But it is trickling down, and I think in sports boat classes in particular, in the 49ers and the 29ers, and the NACRA, who are opting for that shorter race format, that's also keeping the younger generation interested, because they don't have 2 hours to go out and do a race anymore. They want to get those 5 races in and go and be with their friends as well. So I think that's where the World Match Racing Tour is a really cool thing too, because it's short, fast format, 10, 12-minute races, and they get to be with their friends for a week. And that's, I definitely came out of there because we had the women's tour, but there's things like that, the time as well, which I think is important.
And in the second and third generation of the AC75s, as that technology and that design gets better, those boats will be closer, which is all to the good for the viewer and for keeping people engaged.
Julien, Red Bull Alinghi Racing, that's now based in Barcelona. So is that where you're based right now?
Yeah, so in summer we decided quite early in the campaign to have the team quite soon in the venue. So yeah, the whole team is there. We are operating since September, and I actually thought a bit about the question for the last couple of days, and something that could also answer the question of what would be the impact of this format. I think the venue would be actually also a good example, because every morning when I go to work at the base, I'm actually biking through to the place where the village of the AC is going to be, and this place it's at the beating heart of Barcelona, and I think Barcelona. It's a big city. There will be a lot of persons traveling there during the Cup, but they will not necessarily come to the place to see the America's Cup. They will be exposed, and I think that, and the amount of tourists. Well, I was there in summer. It's quite big. The city can be quite crowded, but it will be a good exposures to new person, which I think will be really positive. And clearly at Alinghi Red Bull Racing, we are looking forward to that, and there will be new people that will experience the America's Cup, and that's maybe something that's slightly different, where Brookline was a sailing city. You had Bermuda, which was also the case, and there you will have a lot of, the village will be at the middle of the city, which will be positive, I think.
And in terms of that trickle down into mainstream sailing, do you know if Alinghi Red Bull Racing has any plans to do any social engagement with the local people?
I think it's too early to make any comment, but yes. So clearly the goal for Alinghi Red Bull is to get the design rolling, because we are a new team and we have a lot of work to do, which is something we have done, and then all the commercial and all this part will grow with time, and yeah, probably, but it's I don't have any further news on that yet.
No, okay. I'm going to see if anyone wants to ask a question. Any questions? And we can go pretty much in any direction on this, so any questions?
I can bring up something we haven't spoken about yet.
Sure.
Which is the Women's America's Cup and the return of the Youth America's Cup. So I'm personally hoping, I mean, I don't need to be on board with all women's sailing, or I think the SailGP is doing a great thing in having the Women's Pathway program, but I am excited that we are having a circuit for, potentially, if we can make it work, having women at that level as well, so that we can try and bridge the gap, because something interesting got brought up earlier with the Swiss team not being allowed to do SailGP and also work Alinghi, which is kind of good in a way, because it means that more Swiss sailors, and we were talking to Dee and Vicky about this, it means more Swiss sailors will actually be exposed to that high level of sailing in both the SailGP and the America's Cup, and be upskilled. And I think that's where women have gotten left behind a little bit, because for a long time we had that super breed of sailors, the Pete Burling, who's winning the Moss Worlds and doing the Olympics, and then doing the Volvo with Brunel, and then then getting a SailGP team. So the guys just got better and better and better. So I think a women's AC program does potentially give us that trickle down effect, that we can start trying to bridge that intense skill gap, which is something that we do need to address, obviously.
Okay, well that could be something to follow up on.
There you go.
Talking about sailors that seem to be everywhere and not giving anyone else a look in, I can see someone who used to work for Oracle Team Oracle Team USA. Peter Rush, you're with the Ocean Race now, but you've got a long history in the America's Cup. I think there's an implication in the question that there should be a trickle down. Does it matter, and do you think that trickle down will continue the way that we've seen Kevlar sails and carbon masts come through from the America's Cup in the past?
I mean, it's a great question, and the trickle down impact, if you go back 2 or 3 editions, the foiling arguably, the efforts in the Moth class started it, but it was really what happened in the America's Cup in San Francisco that really started to make foiling something that was big time. I think what's really interesting in the question that's posed as to, what do we think is going to be the impact? The reality is we don't know. We have no idea. And if you were to look back at the Valencia America's Cup, I don't think anybody would have thought that 3 years later there'd be a deed of gift match with these immense boats, and probably one of the more pure America's Cups, if you go back to the deed of gift, where it's just It's two very wealthy individuals who developed a healthy dislike for each other and spent a lot of money developing crazy boats. I mean, those boats were insane, but they sort of led us into where we are now. I think if you went back just a couple of editions ago, you would look at Bermuda and say, well, 5 teams have signed up to a framework agreement and had Oracle Team USA defended the Cup there. A lot of what we see in SailGP would be what the America's Cup is now. So it's really difficult to predict an impact as to what's going to happen. We need to see who's going to win. And again, the reality is that the opinions that any of us have don't matter. The only thing that matters is who wins, and they get to impose their will on it. And we'll see what that means in a couple of years.
And there you have it, every reason to hate the America's Cup and love it at the same time. Dawn Riley, finally, I've got an excuse to ask you a question. Just remind us of your history in the America's Cup before I...
Sorry, 92, only female, 95 women's team, 2000 CEO. Eliminated New York Yacht Club and Dennis Conner. And then general manager of the French team, 2007.
Okay, and does I'm going to put it in a different way, does the America's Cup owe anything to the rest of the sport?
No, I've been sitting here for 2 days thinking that the one thing we're missing, we keep talking around in circles, the America's Cup technology, if it trickles down, it's a privilege because there's some rich people and sponsors that are supporting it, and some really smart people that are using every ounce of their energy. I mean, who here has been on an America's Cup campaign, and how much have you slept? Very little. So it's like this massive force that then allows us to have this technology, and it's at the right time. There was a catamaran against the big boat from the Kiwis. There was foiling way the hell back. There's a black and white photo, but it was the technology of the computers that has allowed foiling. So it's a big circle. And just go back to the Whitbread, we had a picture of Peter Blake and Steinlager. That was a radical thing to have a mizzen. So it's just this circular technology, and the only thing that I want from the America's Cup is to have excellent racing. The data coming off is super important because while we all geek out about it, it's educating the public, which therefore circles back for interest, for sponsors. And the people are what is the story. And the only critical thing, because I want to go sailing on one of those boats, but I want to see the faces, and I have people ask me, well, is it hard to sail? Because you don't see the action, you don't see the sweat, you don't see the salt, you don't see the grunting and all that. So that's the only thing. If we could make those boats look harder, I think it'd be pretty cool.
But I'm happy to reply on that one, because I can tell you in training they're really hard to sail. That was a really good point. When you see them training a couple of months before the Cup, you were wondering whether we could do a dry lap. And by some magic, you always manage to get them sailing on the racetrack. But maybe also we didn't talk, but there will be a sky tents. If I'm right, they are filming a bit the campaign, so we will have more an inside view of what's going on during training, during how the team is being built, and also that could change a bit the perspective. But I can tell you, those boats are not easy to sail. They are definitely super complicated, and what you see during the Cup, it looks super easy. It looks like you take the helm and you are going to do a falling tack and a falling jibe, but no, those sailors, they know what they do, but they also have a huge team behind which are working crazy hours to make that work, and the public, they don't really see it.
Exactly.
But it is happening in the background.
Yeah, no, I know it's hard, but I just want everybody to know that.
I'm going to pick up on one of your points. I think you're spot on, because we saw leading into San Francisco, Artemis, I mean, obviously there was an issue there, but they went a bit early on the foil, but Emirates started foiling and it went around the world, and that forced that change, and all of a sudden we saw the sailors then moving from the World Match Racing Tour to the Moth Worlds in 2015. Every single person went to the Mothworlds, and then you go to Auckland and you're not quite sure how they're training, and then we hear about the simulators. So now there's simulators, and the data there has become so important too. So I think it is definitely a privilege, but I love to see it when it does help to lift our sport and move it forward, because I've been addicted to the America's Cup for a long time, and it gives me a good excuse to keep supporting it. So.
But just very lastly, Don, Nic mentioned that there are signs of opportunity for women to compete in the America's Cup again. So it seems to be going in the right direction. You were involved in the campaign that, well, was there any legacy that came out of that?
Was there any legacy that came out of the women's team?
Yeah, because I mean...
Yeah, the legacy that came out of the women's team straight up was that the very basic club level, when women were told, you can't sail because you're a girl, they could say, F you, look at what's happening in the America's Cup. So it was absolute, and it was direct, and it was effective. I would do speeches after when I was the only one, and women would come up to me, this is anecdotal, but they'd come up to me and say, oh, I used to sail, but then I got divorced. And then after the women's team, when the first woman came up to me and said, I used to sail, I got divorced, kicked him to the curb, I kept the boat. I was like, oh, we've made some progress. I want to say that the youth in the Women's America's Cup sure as hell better be authentic. It cannot just be window dressing. It cannot be greenwashing. We gotta come up with a word, Vicky. Gender washing. It can't be gender washing. There we go.
Tokenistic. Can't be tokenistic. Agreed.
Dawn, thank you very much. Any more questions? Well, actually, I'm sure we've had a question yet. It's me asking questions, isn't it? But anyone got a question? Because I'm going to go into my next victim, if not. And that would be Matt Sheehan. Because Matt, you are an RS 400 sailor. That's a little hiking out dinghy that's very successful in the UK. Ian Walker is known to sail one of those from time to time as well. You were there for the last America's Cup, working for the event and also making your own videos. We've already heard that you're a big fan of these boats, and you come from a design background, a ship design background as well. So where do you see the potential trickle down in any terms you talk about?
Well, I think that the trickle down is actually, certainly at the moment, we've all been sort of wooed by fantastic images of the cup boats foiling around the place. It's been very captivating, but and there are clearly trickle down things in some of the big tech. But the thing that really interests me is the trickle down in the small, not the small, the stuff we can't see behind the scenes, the systems, the complex systems down below decks that are feeding other parts of our sport. And having looked very closely at some of the latest Mocha boats, having been on a couple of the LT boats just recently, it's amazing how this technology is going backwards and forwards. And we're in a very, very exciting time. The only slight problem is you can't see it happening unless you can actually get on the boat and then understand what the hell the engineers are telling you, which is also a task in itself. It's difficult to get your head around it, but there's no question it's having a big effect. And one of the areas that I would suggest that it's having an effect in is the gender issue on board these boats. Because if ever there was a time when America's Cup boats, Sail GP boats, and boats that have powered systems on board can get the muscle and the grunt out of the equation and open it up properly. Because that's always been the excuse in the past in the Cup, is that the trouble is we just can't, when women are on the handles, they don't generally generate as much power as the men, and that's always been a real problem. But now there's no excuse. And look at the number of women that are sailing, foiling Nacra cats, 49er FXs and high-performance boats who've got a lot of experience and talent sailing high-performance boats. And if I'm honest, I'm a little frustrated that the big events, the Cup boats and the Sail GP boats, are not getting more women on the boat, because there's really no excuse. I wasn't expecting that, but anyway, thank you very much. But I do feel that because my daughter told me I had to say it. But no, that's not true.
Who sells video in the RS 400?
Indeed, she does. But no, I do genuinely believe that, and I think you only have to, anybody who takes issue with that, well, I'm sorry, but you're wrong, because if you go and have a look at the Amoca 60s, and look at Sam Davies is out there, we've got Pip Hare out there, we've got Justine Bedreau out there. There is no excuse for this anymore. There just isn't. And we're swamped with fantastic, exciting technology and a future that, well, I think is probably the most exciting time that I can remember in sailing from a technology point of view. And the America's Cup can take a great deal of the credit for that, because it's been the trigger, and it's also been a place where, fortunately, there have been some people with very deep pockets who've been prepared to invest in it for a long time, and that's got us a long way up the technology curve. And I'm very pleased with it.
Matt, thank you very much. Anyone on the panel? Anyone on the panel care to respond to what Matt has just said?
It will happen. It will happen.
And in Dubai, Laurent Matreau was on the grind. She wasn't at the back, she was in an actual role. So hopefully it's only a matter of time. Hattie Rogers was training, so there were 2 girls on the boat for the first time as well, but not in a race. So hopefully we're getting a bit closer there. But that's I agree with you completely. And I'm glad you're sailing with your dad. There's nothing, or with your daughter, there's nothing better than sailing with your dad.
Thank you very much, panel. Really fascinating, and thanks for your comments from the floor. So, thank you.
Thank you very much.
We're on to